A rancher finds his prize bull lying still in a far pasture. The animal looks fine from far away, but up close, something is very wrong. The bull's blood is completely gone. Its eyes, tongue, and private parts have been cut out. The cuts are perfect. They look like a doctor made them. There are no footprints in the soft dirt around the dead animal, no tire tracks, no signs of a fight. The cuts are so clean they look like they were made with a hot knife. This is not the work of wild animals or sickness. This is something else. Welcome to the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado. For more than 50 years, ranchers have found their cattle cut up in ways that make no sense. More than 10,000 cases have been written down across the American West. But nowhere has this happened more than in this high desert valley. The valley sits between tall mountain peaks. The San Luis Valley covers 8,000 square miles of south-central Colorado and northern New Mexico. It sits almost 8,000 feet above sea level. It is one of the largest high valleys in the world. The land is both beautiful and hard to live on. Rolling grass fields stretch toward far-off mountain ranges. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise up to the east. The San Juan Mountains fill the western sky. The valley floor has small farming towns and huge cattle ranches. These ranches have been in families for many years. The area has always been strange. Old rock carvings tell of weird things seen by native peoples. Spanish explorers in the 1500s reported strange lights in the sky. Early settlers told stories of cattle found dead in odd ways. But the modern cattle cutting mystery did not start until the late 1960s. The first big case happened in September 1967 near Alamosa, Colorado. A horse named Snippy belonged to Burl Lewis. Lewis lived on a small ranch outside town. The 3-year-old horse had wandered away from home. It did not come back. Lewis got his neighbors to help look for Snippy. They found the horse's body 2 days later. It was in a clearing about half a mile from the ranch house. The horse lay on its side in a weird position. Its head and neck had no skin or meat left. Only white bone showed. The cuts looked perfect. They were not rough or torn like when wild animals eat something. The rest of the hide was not damaged. Most scary of all, there was no blood anywhere around the dead horse. Lewis called the local sheriff. The deputies who came to look were confused by what they saw. Sheriff Ben Phillips had looked into hundreds of cases with dead farm animals during his career. He had seen animals killed by wild beasts, disease, and lightning. This was not like anything he had seen before. Dr. John Altshuler was a doctor from Denver who looks at dead bodies. He looked at Snippy's remains when the family asked him to. What he found was troubling. The cuts showed signs of very high heat. It was like they were made with a tool that burns as it cuts. Under a microscope, the edges of the wounds looked melted together. Dr. Altshuler said that no known cutting tool from 1967 could have made such perfect, heat-sealed cuts. The Snippy case got attention from newspapers and TV across the country. UFO researchers came to the San Luis Valley. Some said that visitors from space were doing tests on Earth's farm animals. Others thought the government was doing secret research. People who did not believe said that normal rotting and wild animals could explain how the remains looked. But Snippy was just the start. Within months of finding the horse, similar cases began showing up all over the valley. They happened a lot. The pattern was always the same. Healthy cattle would be found dead with certain body parts removed. The cuts were perfect, like a doctor made them. Blood was completely gone from the bodies and the ground around them. There were no signs of a fight, no proof of how the animals died. Manuel Sanchez ran a cattle ranch near the town of Dulce. This town sits just south of the Colorado border in New Mexico. His family had worked the same land for 3 generations. In the spring of 1975, Sanchez found 4 of his best cattle dead in a far pasture. Each animal had been cut up in the exact same way. The cattle had their left eyes removed with perfect cuts. Their tongues were missing. The tongues had been cut out through small holes in the jaw. The private parts had been cut away with careful, round cuts. Most puzzling of all, a small piece of tissue seemed to have been taken from the animal's rear ends. The wounds showed no signs of bleeding. Sanchez was a practical man. He had spent his whole life working with cattle. He knew what wild animals did when they killed livestock. Coyotes and mountain lions would tear flesh and scatter body parts. Birds would leave rough wounds. This was different. The cuts were too clean, too careful. It was like someone with medical training had operated on his livestock. Local animal doctor, Dr. Wallace Leary, looked at the Sanchez cattle. The county sheriff asked him to do this. Dr. Leary had worked in the area for over 20 years. He knew every disease and bug that hurt livestock in the region. His exam showed something that went against his medical training. The inside organs that stayed in the bodies showed no signs of rotting. This was strange because the animals had been dead for several days. The lack of blood was complete. Dr. Leary figured that each steer had about 35 gallons of blood when alive. Not a single drop was left in their bodies or on the ground around them. The perfect cuts suggested the use of advanced medical tools. Dr. Leary noted that the edges of the wounds looked like they had been burned by very hot heat. He had never seen anything like it in his decades of animal doctoring. The doctor told state people about what he found. They started an official investigation. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation gave Agent Carl Whiteside the job of leading the inquiry into the cattle cuttings. Whiteside used to be military police. He had experience with hard criminal cases. He worked on the investigation like a trained law officer. Whiteside's first step was to write down every reported case in the region. By the end of 1975, he had written down over 200 cases of cattle cutting in Colorado alone. The cases were very similar in their details. The same organs were always removed. The surgical cuts were identical. The complete absence of blood happened in every case. Agent Whiteside talked to dozens of ranchers, animal doctors, and witnesses. He talked with crime experts and medical people. He looked at physical evidence and crime scenes. Despite his thorough investigation, Whiteside could not find any normal explanation for the cuttings. The agent's report to state officials was serious. He concluded that the cattle were being killed and cut up by unknown people using advanced techniques and equipment. The perfect cuts suggested medical or scientific training. The complete removal of blood required advanced knowledge and special tools. Whiteside's investigation also found a disturbing pattern of strange things happening. Many ranchers reported seeing unusual lights in the sky around the time their cattle were found cut up. Witnesses described silent aircraft moving at impossible speeds. Some reported seeing unmarked helicopters flying low over ranch properties. The mystery got deeper in the winter of 1976. Several ranchers in the valley began reporting strange electrical problems. Equipment would break down for no reason. Radio and TV reception became bad in certain areas. Compasses would spin wildly when brought near the places where cut-up cattle had been found. Tom Miller owned a big ranch on the eastern edge of the valley. His property bordered the Sangre de Cristo wilderness area. Miller was a serious cattleman who took pride in running a good operation. He kept detailed records of his herd. He knew each animal by sight. On a cold February morning, Miller rode out to check on a group of pregnant cows in a distant pasture. He found one of his best breeding cows lying in the snow. The animal had given birth recently, but her newborn calf was nowhere to be found. The cow's udder had been completely removed with surgical cuts. Miller looked at the scene carefully. The snow around the dead body was not disturbed except for his own horse's hoofprints. There were no tracks leading to or away from the dead animal. The cuts on the cow were identical to those he had seen in previous cutting cases. But this time, something else was missing besides the usual organs. The rancher searched the area around for the newborn calf. He followed a fence line for nearly a mile in each direction. He checked every gulch and thicket where a small animal might hide. The calf had simply vanished without a trace. That evening, Miller called Sheriff Richards to report what happened. The sheriff had looked into dozens of cutting cases over the past several years. He was no longer surprised by the bizarre nature of the crimes. But the missing calf meant things were getting worse. Dr. Howard Burgess was an animal doctor from Colorado State University who studied dead livestock. He agreed to look at Miller's cow. Dr. Burgess focused on looking at dead farm animals for legal cases. He had studied several previous cutting cases. He was developing ideas about how the people responsible worked. The exam confirmed the now familiar pattern. The cuts were made with an extremely sharp tool that burned the wounds as it cut. The cuts required years of surgical training. Most puzzling was the complete absence of blood in the dead body and area around it. Dr. Burgess collected tissue samples for lab testing. Under a microscope, the cells at the wound edges showed damage from exposure to intense heat. The temperature required to produce such effects would be over 300 degrees. No normal surgical tool could make such heat while keeping the cuts so perfect. The tissue samples also showed high levels of potassium and magnesium in the organs that remained. These trace elements are not naturally found in such amounts in healthy cattle. Dr. Burgess thought that the animals might have been exposed to some form of electric radiation before death. Spring brought a temporary quiet period in the cutting reports. Ranchers began to hope that whatever force was responsible for the killings had moved on to other areas. Their hope did not last long. By summer, the cases came back with greater intensity than before. The breakthrough came in July 1976, when rancher Eddie Romero saw something that would change the entire investigation. Romero owned a modest ranch near the town of Antonito. He was known throughout the valley as an honest, reliable man. He rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. Romero was checking on his cattle late one evening when he saw lights moving across his property. At first, he thought it was a helicopter looking for drug smugglers. The area was known as a path for illegal trafficking from Mexico. But as the lights got closer, Romero realized he was looking at something far more unusual. The craft was silent. It moved with smooth precision, unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. It hovered about 50 feet above a group of his cattle in the center of the pasture. A bright beam of white light came down from the object. It lit up several animals below. Romero watched in stunned silence as one of his steers was lifted off the ground by an invisible force. The animal seemed to be held in some kind of energy field that kept it completely still. The craft and its cargo then moved slowly toward the far end of the pasture. Then it disappeared beyond a ridge. The rancher rode to the spot where the event had occurred. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle about 30 feet across. The remaining cattle stood clustered at the edge of the circle. They refused to enter the affected area. Romero marked the location and returned home to think about what he had witnessed. The next morning, Romero found the missing steer at the edge of his property. It was nearly 2 miles from where it had been taken. The animal was dead and cut up in the now familiar pattern. Its blood had been completely drained. Specific organs had been removed with surgical cuts. But this time, there was a witness to how it had happened. Romero's account sparked intense interest from investigators and researchers. His reputation for honesty made him a credible witness. The physical evidence at the scene supported his story. Soil samples from the circular mark tested positive for high electric radiation levels. Federal people took notice of the situation in the San Luis Valley. In August 1976, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived to conduct their own inquiry. The FBI's involvement signaled that the cattle cuttings were being treated as a serious federal crime. Special Agent Kenneth Romero was assigned to lead the federal investigation. Agent Romero was not related to the rancher who had witnessed the aerial event. He was a career law enforcement officer with experience in complex fraud and conspiracy cases. The FBI's resources allowed for a more complete investigation than state people could provide. Agent Romero worked with local law enforcement, animal doctors, and crime specialists. The Bureau's lab facilities were made available for analysis of physical evidence. Agent Romero's team wrote down over 300 cases of cattle cutting in Colorado and surrounding states. They found patterns in the timing and location of events. Most cuttings occurred during new moon phases when light was minimal. Most cases were discovered within a 50-mile radius of the town of Alamosa. The federal investigation also found connections between cutting sites and reported UFO sightings. In 78% of cases, witnesses reported seeing unusual aerial things within 72 hours of discovering cut-up livestock. The connection was too strong to be coincidental. Despite their extensive investigation, FBI agents could not identify normal suspects or motives for the crimes. The perfect cuts ruled out random vandalism or cult activity. The complete removal of blood suggested special equipment beyond the abilities of typical criminals. Agent Romero's final report came out in 1979. It said that the cattle cuttings were a genuine mystery. The FBI had found no evidence of hoaxes or natural explanations for most cases. The federal investigation was officially closed, with the cases remaining unsolved. The early 1980s brought new developments in the San Luis Valley mystery. Researcher Linda Moulton Howe began writing down cases with better scientific methods. Howe was an investigative journalist with a background in medical research. Her approach combined traditional investigative techniques with rigorous scientific analysis. Howe's research showed additional details about the cutting event. She wrote down cases where inside organs had been removed through small cuts that should have been impossible given the size of the organs. Animal doctors confirmed that a cow's heart could not be taken out through a cut smaller than 6 inches across. Yet that's exactly what appeared to have happened in several cases. The perfect cuts continued to amaze medical people. Dr. John Altshuler had looked at Snippy a decade earlier. He studied additional cases throughout the 1980s. His findings stayed the same. The cuts showed evidence of heat burning at a cellular level. The technology required to produce such effects was beyond anything available to civilian or military surgeons. New cases also showed evidence of anti-clotting substances in the animal's blood supply. Lab analysis found trace amounts of chemicals that would prevent blood from clotting normally. The presence of these substances suggested that the people responsible had advanced knowledge of cow biology. They also had access to special drugs. The San Luis Valley continued to be the center of cutting activity throughout the decade. Local ranchers developed informal networks to share information about events. Many invested in security systems and surveillance equipment to protect their livestock. Despite increased watchfulness, the cuttings continued with depressing regularity. The people responsible seemed to know about security measures and avoid detection. Cases occurred on properties with motion sensors, guard dogs, and armed patrols. Yet no one was ever caught in the act. During this time, rancher Maria Gonzalez experienced one of the most disturbing events ever recorded in the valley. Gonzalez owned a medium-sized ranch near the town of Center. Her family had been raising cattle in the area since the 1940s. She knew her animals well and maintained careful records of their health and behavior. On a warm August night in 1983, Gonzalez was awakened by the sound of her cattle bellowing in distress. The noise was unlike anything she had heard before. It was not the typical sound of cattle being threatened by predators. This was different. The animals sounded terrified. Gonzalez grabbed her rifle and flashlight. She made her way to the pasture where she kept her prize breeding stock. What she found there would haunt her for the rest of her life. 12 of her best cattle were standing perfectly still in the center of the field. They were arranged in a perfect circle. Their eyes were wide with terror, but they made no sound. Above the cattle, Gonzalez saw a large, dark object hovering silently about 30 feet off the ground. The object was roughly triangular in shape. It had no visible lights or markings. The only sound was a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground. As Gonzalez watched, a beam of pale blue light descended from the object. The beam covered one of the cattle in the circle. The animal rose slowly off the ground, still maintaining its rigid posture. Gonzalez raised her rifle and fired 3 shots at the object. The bullets seemed to have no effect. The craft began to move away, carrying the cow with it. The remaining 11 cattle suddenly broke from their frozen positions. They scattered in all directions, running as if their lives depended on it. Gonzalez tried to follow the object, but it moved too quickly. Within seconds, it had disappeared beyond the horizon. The next morning, Gonzalez found the missing cow at the edge of her property. It was dead and cut up in the familiar pattern. But this case was different from previous events. The cow's entire skeleton had been removed. Only the hide and organs remained, collapsed in a heap on the ground. Animal doctor exam of the remains revealed something never seen before. The bones had been taken out without damaging the surrounding tissue. No cuts or tears were visible on the hide. It was as if the skeleton had been dissolved or made to disappear. No known medical technique could account for such a procedure. The event at the Gonzalez ranch marked a turning point in the cattle cutting mystery. Previous cases had involved the removal of specific organs and the draining of blood. This case suggested abilities far beyond anything documented before. The complete taking of a skeleton without damaging surrounding tissue defied all known surgical methods. Federal investigators returned to the valley to look at the Gonzalez case. Special teams from the Department of Agriculture and the Centers for Disease Control were sent to study the remains. Their conclusions were classified and never released to the public. Local residents reported increased military activity in the area following the Gonzalez event. Unmarked vehicles were seen patrolling ranch roads at night. Helicopters conducted frequent overflights of properties where cuttings had occurred. Ranchers who tried to approach these aircraft were warned away by armed personnel. The psychological impact on the ranching community became severe during this period. Families that had lived in the valley for generations began to consider leaving. The constant fear of losing livestock to unknown predators took a heavy toll on mental health. Many ranchers reported sleep disorders, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was a psychologist from Denver. The state hired her to study the psychological effects of the cutting mystery on local residents. Her research revealed widespread trauma within the ranching community. Symptoms included being overly alert, paranoia, and social withdrawal. Dr. Mitchell's study found that children in ranching families were particularly affected. Many developed phobias related to darkness and open spaces. School performance declined significantly among children whose families had experienced livestock cuttings. Some children reported nightmares about flying objects and dead animals. The economic impact of the cuttings was also becoming severe. Insurance companies refused to cover livestock deaths attributed to unexplained causes. Ranchers were forced to absorb the full financial cost of their losses. Many families went into debt trying to replace valuable breeding stock. Some ranchers attempted to form cooperative security arrangements. They pooled resources to hire armed guards and purchase surveillance equipment. These efforts met with limited success. The cuttings continued to occur despite increased security measures. By the mid-1980s, the San Luis Valley had become known worldwide for its cattle cutting problem. Researchers, journalists, and tourists flocked to the area. This attention brought some economic benefits through increased tourism, but many locals resented their region's reputation as a paranormal hotspot. The mystery began to affect property values throughout the valley. Ranches with histories of cutting events became difficult to sell. Real estate agents had to disclose cutting activity to potential buyers. Some properties remained on the market for years without finding buyers. As the 1990s approached, the cattle cutting mystery had persisted for over 20 years. Hundreds of cases had been written down. Thousands of animals had been killed. Multiple investigations had failed to identify the people responsible or their methods. The San Luis Valley remained ground zero for one of the most enduring, unexplained mysteries in modern times. Technological advances in the 1990s raised hopes that the mystery might finally be solved. DNA analysis became widely available for crime investigations. Satellite surveillance systems could monitor large areas continuously. Digital crime science offered new methods for analyzing physical evidence. Despite these advances, the cattle cuttings continued to confound investigators. Modern cases showed the same characteristics that puzzled authorities in the 1970s. The surgical precision remained unexplained. The complete removal of blood defied normal understanding. The absence of physical evidence pointing to human perpetrators suggested either extraordinary skill in avoiding detection or involvement of non-human entities. Advanced lab techniques revealed new details about the cutting process. Electron microscopy showed that the cutting instruments used created wounds at a molecular level. The heat required to produce such precise burning exceeded the capabilities of any known surgical equipment. Lab analysis of tissue samples revealed trace elements not found in normal cattle. These substances included rare earth metals and isotopes that do not occur naturally on Earth. The presence of these materials suggested either extraterrestrial origin or access to advanced nuclear technology. The development of night vision cameras and motion-activated surveillance systems allowed ranchers to monitor their properties more effectively. However, these technologies failed to capture clear images of the people responsible. The few photographs and videos that were obtained showed only vague shapes or unexplained lights. GPS tracking devices implanted in livestock provided new insights into the mystery. Cattle that were later found cut up showed unusual movement patterns before their deaths. The tracking data indicated that the animals had been transported to locations several miles from where they were discovered. This transportation occurred without triggering motion sensors or alerting guard dogs. The tracking data also revealed time anomalies that defied explanation. Some cattle showed location data indicating they were in multiple places at the same time. Other animals registered as being in locations that were physically impossible to reach. These anomalies suggested interference with the GPS signals or manipulation of space-time itself. As the new millennium approached, rancher William Torres experienced an encounter that provided the most detailed account of the cutting process ever recorded. Torres owned a large ranch near the town of Alamosa. His property included over 5,000 acres of grazing land and state-of-the-art security systems. On the night of the 15th of October, 1999, Torres was conducting a routine patrol of his property when he observed unusual lights moving across his eastern pasture. The lights appeared to be attached to a large, disc-shaped object that moved silently through the air. The craft was about 100 feet across and showed no visible means of propulsion. Torres positioned himself behind a cluster of trees and observed the object through binoculars. He watched as the craft descended to a height of about 20 feet above a group of his cattle. A section of the object's underside opened, revealing a brightly lit interior. Several humanoid figures could be seen moving within the craft. A beam of pale green light came from the opening. When the beam struck one of the cattle, the animal became completely still. The cow was then lifted into the craft through the opening. Torres estimated that the entire process took less than 3 minutes. The craft remained stationary for about 15 minutes. During this time, Torres could see activity through the opening. The humanoid figures appeared to be working on the captured animal. Tools and instruments were visible, but their exact nature could not be determined from his position. When the activity ceased, the cow was lowered back to the ground. The opening in the craft closed, and the object departed at incredible speed. Torres watched until it disappeared beyond the horizon. The entire encounter lasted about 20 minutes. Torres approached the site where the cow had been returned. The animal was dead and showed the typical signs of cutting. However, this case included additional details that had not been observed before. The cow's hide showed no signs of the lifting process. There were no marks or injuries that would indicate how the animal had been transported. Most significantly, Torres had captured the entire encounter on his ranch's security cameras. The video footage provided the clearest documentation of the cutting process ever obtained. The images showed the craft, the abduction sequence, and the return of the cut-up animal in remarkable detail. Federal authorities confiscated the security footage within 48 hours of the event. Torres was visited by agents who identified themselves as members of a joint military-civilian task force. He was required to sign agreements not to discuss what happened. He was warned not to talk about the encounter publicly. Despite the official secrecy surrounding the Torres case, word of the event spread throughout the ranching community. The detailed nature of his account and his reputation for honesty lent credibility to his story. The case became a turning point in how many locals viewed the cutting mystery. The Torres encounter also attracted attention from the international scientific community. Researchers from universities around the world requested access to the video footage. These requests were denied by federal authorities who cited national security concerns. The early 2000s brought increased government interest in the cattle cutting mystery. The Department of Homeland Security classified the events as potential threats to agricultural security. A joint task force was established to coordinate investigations across multiple agencies. The task force included representatives from the FBI, the Department of Agriculture, the Centers for Disease Control, and several military intelligence agencies. Their mandate was to determine whether the cuttings posed a threat to the nation's food supply or represented evidence of hostile foreign activity. The task force's activities were largely classified, but leaked documents revealed the scope of their investigation. Hundreds of cutting sites were subjected to extensive crime analysis. Soil samples, tissue specimens, and environmental data were collected for study in government labs. The investigation also included surveillance of known UFO researchers and journalists covering the cutting story. Phone conversations were monitored and electronic communications were intercepted. The extent of this surveillance suggested that the government viewed the mystery as a significant security concern. Despite the resources devoted to the investigation, the task force was unable to identify normal explanations for the cuttings. Their final report, portions of which were later declassified, acknowledged that the cases represented anomalous events requiring further study. The report recommended continued monitoring of cutting events and increased security around critical agricultural facilities. It also suggested the development of new technologies for detecting and tracking unidentified aerial phenomena. Recent decades have seen the emergence of new technologies that might help solve the mystery. Artificial intelligence systems can analyze vast amounts of data to identify patterns invisible to human investigators. Quantum sensors can detect electromagnetic anomalies with unprecedented precision. Advanced materials science offers new insights into the tools and techniques used in the cuttings. Despite these technological advances, the mystery continues to occur with disturbing regularity. Recent cases show the same characteristics that have puzzled investigators for over 50 years. The surgical precision remains perfect. The blood removal is complete. The people responsible leave no trace of their identity or methods. The psychological impact on ranching communities has become generational. Children who grew up hearing stories of cut-up cattle are now adults dealing with their own livestock losses. The constant threat has become part of the cultural fabric of rural Colorado and New Mexico. Some ranching families have developed elaborate protective rituals to ward off the mysterious predators. These include the use of bright lights, loud noises, and electric devices. While these measures provide psychological comfort, they have proven ineffective at preventing cuttings. The economic impact continues to mount. Insurance companies still refuse to cover unexplained livestock deaths. Government assistance programs provide minimal compensation for losses. Many ranchers have been forced to sell their land or change their livelihood entirely. The cattle cutting mystery has also influenced popular culture and conspiracy theories. Books, movies, and television shows have dramatized the mystery. Internet forums are filled with speculation about extraterrestrial involvement and government cover-ups. The line between fact and fiction has become increasingly blurred. Academic researchers continue to study the mystery Using increasingly sophisticated methods, biochemical analysis reveals new details about the cutting process. Advanced imaging techniques show microscopic evidence of the tools and methods used. Statistical analysis identifies patterns in the timing and location of events. However, these scientific advances have yet to provide definitive answers. Each new piece of evidence raises more questions than it resolves. The mystery seems to adapt to new detection methods, remaining always one step ahead of human understanding. The San Luis Valley continues to be the epicenter of cutting activity. New cases are reported on a regular basis. Each event adds to the accumulated evidence that something extraordinary is occurring in this remote region of Colorado. Local law enforcement agencies have developed standardized procedures for investigating cutting reports. Deputies are trained to recognize the signs of anomalous livestock deaths. Evidence collection protocols have been refined based on decades of experience. Yet, the people responsible remain as elusive as ever. The community response to the mystery has evolved over time. Support groups provide assistance to ranchers who have lost livestock. Educational programs help residents understand the scientific aspects of the mystery. Tourism initiatives attempt to generate revenue from the region's unusual reputation. What makes the cattle cutting mystery so enduring is not just the frequency of events, but their consistency across decades and geographic areas. The same surgical techniques, the same pattern of organ removal, and the same absence of normal evidence have characterized cases from the 1960s through the present day. The people responsible, whether human or otherwise, have demonstrated remarkable consistency in their methods. The precision never wavers. The selection of specific organs never varies. The complete removal of blood remains absolute. Such consistency over 5 decades suggests either an organization with extraordinary discipline or entities operating according to biological imperatives beyond human understanding. The witnesses who have seen unusual aerial things in connection with cutting cases include law enforcement officers, military personnel, and aviation professionals. Their training and experience in identifying normal aircraft lend credibility to their accounts of objects displaying flight characteristics beyond known technology. Environmental scientists have documented long-term effects at cutting sites. Soil chemistry remains altered years after events occur. Plant growth patterns show persistent anomalies. Wildlife behavior in affected areas differs from normal patterns. These environmental impacts suggest that the cutting process involves forces that science does not yet understand. The medical aspects of the mystery continue to baffle animal doctors. The precision of the surgical techniques exceeds the capabilities of any known medical instruments. The complete removal of blood requires technology that does not exist in normal medicine. The absence of bacterial decay in the remains defies basic biological principles. Attempts to replicate the cutting techniques under lab conditions have failed. Even with access to the most advanced surgical equipment, researchers cannot duplicate the precision and effects observed in field cases. This suggests that the people responsible possess technology or knowledge far beyond current human capabilities. The San Luis Valley continues to produce new cases with disturbing regularity. Each event adds to the accumulated evidence that something unusual is happening in this remote corner of Colorado. The mystery remains as compelling and troubling today as it was when Snippy was found cut up over 50 years ago. Ranchers still find their cattle dead and surgically cut up. Investigators still discover no normal evidence pointing to human people responsible. The techniques used remain beyond the capabilities of known surgical instruments. The precision never falters, and the blood never returns. The valley keeps its secrets hidden in its vast grasslands and mountain shadows. The questions multiply with each new case. What force possesses the technology and knowledge to perform such precise biological extractions? Why have decades of investigation failed to identify any suspects? How can such extensive activity continue without leaving traces of human involvement? New questions emerge as technology advances. Could the people responsible be using quantum technologies that manipulate matter at the subatomic level? Are the cuttings part of a long-term biological monitoring program conducted by non-human intelligence? Do the events represent evidence of parallel dimensions intersecting with our reality? The answers remain hidden somewhere in the vast expanse of the San Luis Valley. The shadows of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains continue to conceal one of the most enduring mysteries of our time. The high desert landscape holds its secrets close, revealing only enough to deepen the puzzle. Local residents have learned to live with the mystery as a constant presence in their lives. They share information about strange lights and unusual aircraft. They support each other through livestock losses. They maintain their vigilance while accepting that complete understanding may never come. The mystery has become part of the cultural identity of the San Luis Valley. Tour guides point out famous cutting sites to curious visitors. Local museums display exhibits about the mystery. Gift shops sell souvenirs related to the unexplained events. The mystery has become both a burden and a source of regional pride. Young people growing up in the valley learn about the cuttings as part of their local history. They hear stories from their grandparents about the early cases. They see the effects on their families and neighbors. Many develop their own theories about what is happening and why. Some residents have dedicated their lives to solving the mystery. They maintain detailed databases of events. They investigate new cases as they occur. They network with researchers around the world. Their persistence keeps the search for answers alive. The cattle cutting mystery represents one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of modern times. It challenges our understanding of technology, biology, and the nature of reality itself. The San Luis Valley remains at the center of this puzzle, a place where the impossible happens with disturbing regularity. If you've had your own unexplained encounter or have thoughts on what might be happening in Colorado's high country, share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into the mysteries that refuse to be solved.